On the other side of this door is a mathematical laboratory, and every home has one. It is, of course, your kitchen. So let's go inside and see what we can do in here that will help your children with their mathematical understanding. Now, if your kitchen is anything like ours, you'll find it's packed with mathematical shapes. For instance, here we have a group of cylinders of different sizes. Over here we have cuboids, and we've got hundreds of those, as you probably have too. Here, from here to here, this jar is shaped like an octagonal prism. We even have a couple of spheres, and what is turning out to be my favourite shape of all at the moment, and that is the truncated cone. That is a cone with the top chopped off, and there's a virtually perfect one. But I didn't realise how many we had until I started doing this project. Here's another, and here's another, and of course we've got lots of mugs like that. And this little beauty I only discovered the other day. I'm not sure if my wife knows we've got that. In your kitchen you can measure things. You can measure temperature, you can measure volume, and you can measure weight. You can heat things up in the microwave, or on the hob, or in the oven, of course. You can cool things down. You can freeze things. You can even make ice cubes to be used in experiments. You have lots of very cheap materials to conduct your experiments with. Water is the most obvious. And of course you'll have a whole range of pulses, seeds, powders and so on with which your youngsters can conduct experiments. You may even have the odd small bag of rice lying around. All harmless substances that your youngsters can use to develop their mathematical skills. Now, before we get cracking on the mathematical activities that you can do with your youngsters in your own kitchen, I should like to draw your attention to a number of very important points. First of all, please, please, please forget all about imperial units. So it's out of the window with ounces, pounds, fluid ounces, pints, and all that stuff. Please focus entirely on metric units. Now, I've taught mathematics for 30 years, so I do know what I'm talking about here. Please focus entirely on meters, centimetres, millimetres. Focus on kilograms and grams. Focus on litres and millilitres. And above all, focus on Celsius degrees, please. Now, this means, of course, that the instruments in your kitchen must have metric scales on them. Quite a few have both imperial and metric, and it's difficult, I must admit, to ignore the imperial units sometimes, but try and focus on the metric ones entirely. If you have an instrument such as a pair of scales that can be switched between the two, obviously put it on metric and leave it there, please. Now, here we have a typical measuring jug, for instance. On the left, beautiful metric units, litres and millilitres. On the right, those nasty, nasty imperial units. Pints, fluid ounces. Nobody understands the relationship these days between fluid ounces and pints. Well, not unless you're my age. So please, ignore the scale on the right, work entirely in metric. Now we come to the subject of weighing scales. Now you notice I've got two sets here, and they're both set to metric, and of course they're both digital. Now if we take the one on the left and I put this calculator on there, we will see it weighs 136 grams. Fine. Notice the one on the right, its scale is calibrated in kilograms. So when I put it on there, it doesn't say 136 grams, it says 0.136 kilograms. Which one to buy? Well, I would buy both, and this is the reason. When children are learning about decimals, first of all they work with money, and we talk about 25p being 0.25 pounds, 356p being £3.56. But normally we can't do the same thing with grams and kilograms, which means we can't normally go to 3 decimal places. but here we can. You put something on here and you get it in grams. You put it on here and there it is in kilograms. And after a while the youngsters get to see the relationship between the two. And it's especially useful when you have something very light. These tissues, for example. If I put these tissues on the left scale, 5 grams. If I put them on the right scale, 0.005 kilograms. It's showing them very early on the relationship between the grams and the kilograms, and the decimals, of course, to 3 decimal places. Now, if your children are working with these two scales and constantly converting from grams to kilograms, just think how far ahead of all the other youngsters in their class they will be in just a few months' time. This is a wonderful, wonderful discovery. Now, normally I wouldn't recommend any particular make of scales, but in this case I'm definitely going to. This one, as you'll see, is the Skytronic, and I bought these in a professional stationery shop. These are Common Garden Salter scales, and there's the box so that you'll recognise it when you go into your local store to purchase some. Make sure it's displaying in kilograms, of course. Now, you can use them with the bowl or without the bowl, and you'll notice they have a 15-year guarantee, so by the time they start playing up a bit, your children will be well into their 20s. Now, when it comes to measuring temperature, you must work entirely in Celsius. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to get an analog thermometer of this type that has just Celsius on it. So please try and ignore the Fahrenheit, or even better, cover it up with a piece of masking tape. You'll notice that this thermometer goes down as low as -20 and as high as 50. So this is great for putting in the freezer and measuring the temperature in there, but it's not very good for really hot water. What you need is a digital set, really, and here I have one of those meat thermometers, and again I bought this in my local hardware shop, and again it's a Salter. If I turn this on, you'll see it's giving the temperature in degrees Celsius, and this will go down as low as about -50 and well above the temperature of boiling water. Of course, it's a bit sharp at the end, so it needs a bit of protection, and naturally it comes with this pen-shaped object, so you can keep it nice and safe, and if you were working in a store, of course, you could clip it into your pocket. Now, one other thing I'm going to suggest very strongly that you get for your youngsters is an exercise book. And it may be a posh one like this with a very nice spiral binding, or just a cheaper one, it doesn't matter at all. Now, I'm not saying that you should get your youngsters to write down the details of every single experiment in full. That's very boring for them, and to be honest, they're going to do quite enough of that at school over the next few years anyway. Now, you just need somewhere so that they can record very briefly what they're doing, they can write down their results, and in particular, they can see if they spot any patterns. So it might be measuring the temperature inside the freezer, for example, over a period of time. It might be measuring the mass of some cakes they're making. Could be all sorts of things, but they do need somewhere to keep their results, and then they can look back later and see what they were doing and perhaps extend their activities as they get older. So please, an exercise book of some sort or other. Now, I think I can safely assume that you're here because you're a caring parent, and therefore you have a pretty good idea already about safety precautions in the kitchen, particularly where young children are concerned. But as we live in a litigious society, I think I should just point out one or two just in case. Now, in our experiment, sometimes we will be cutting up materials, and sometimes we will be heating things. So first of all, if you have very young children around, either keep these very sharp knives way out of their reach, or let them use them under your own very close supervision, please, and remove them as soon as you've finished. Very nasty. Secondly, anything that's hot, boiling water, things in the microwave or the oven, also need close supervision. There's nothing wrong with children cooking, it's a wonderful activity, but they do need to be kept safe, of course. And that brings up something that you may not know, because I only found this out to my great cost. Years ago I picked up a pair of oven gloves which were damp, and I didn't realise I took something out of the oven and immediately it burnt my hand. Why? Because the water acted as a conductor and went straight through, and my hand was quite nastily burnt actually at the time. So I learnt that the hard way. So make sure that your oven gloves are always dry, please. And secondly, be very careful with small magnets. Now, children love playing with small devices, and we will be using small things such as paper clips and grains and so on, and they do need a little bit of close supervision, especially where very young children are concerned. But if you're using magnets, it's bad enough if a child swallows just one, but if they swallow two can be in different parts of the intestine, which of course curl round and round, and eventually the two magnets will come together, but in different parts of the intestine. Now, the intestine is actually quite a sort of soft material, and the two magnets can pull together and burst through the actual membrane itself, releasing poisons into the bloodstream. And over the last few years there have been a number of very serious incidents like this, which have always involved major surgery. So please keep small objects out of reach unless you're actually supervising them very carefully, and be particularly careful of tiny magnets.